Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our first panel with the question, is diplomacy in crisis? And let me just start a bit from the far. I think that everyone here has already noticed that the rumors about the end of history has been greatly exaggerated. Promised by Francis Fukuyama in 1992, it never came. Moreover, the world clearly doesn't want to end. It is becoming more and more interesting and challenging. Like already been mentioned, the international system envisioned after the Cold War was won by the West. The system centered on American leadership, liberal democracy, and rules-based order is now being challenged. We are seeing growing international instability. We are feeling the first tremors of political earthquakes. We are witnessing the Babylonian destruction of meanings, rules, and narratives that was once very dear for us. But today we are not going to go into analysis on the reasons behind all of this. We will simply record the fact that the very wind of change that Confucius was talking about has suddenly blown. And one of the features of this turbulence seems to be the crisis of diplomacy. The very diplomacy as a method of maintaining a balance of interests, security, and, of course, reasonable compromises. So if the transformation of the world order threatens to become radical, what awaits diplomacy? The crisis? What is the crisis? Is diplomacy responsible for all of the distortions in the system of today's international politics? And most importantly, what should we do if we keep our faith in diplomacy as an instrument recognized by all states in international communications? So this and much more is going to be the subject of today's discussion. Again, I welcome our dear speakers, dear guests. And let me introduce our dear participants. Of course, dear ambassadors, Dr. Petritsch, Dr. Brix, thanks in particular to their efforts, to their diplomatic efforts and now successful cultural, academic, and scientific initiatives, Austrian diplomacy, since the time of Bruno Kreisky, has such a high and impeccable reputation in the international arena, and I would say the world order can still be called as such. We also have a pleasure today to have the esteemed Ms. Rebecca Jovin today joining us, who has been heading the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs for 4 years, where under the leadership, her leadership, a team of creative professionals is working on the disarmament agenda. Also, in addition, Rebecca actively promotes greater involvement of women in international politics, because apparently there too, women will certainly be able to make a disarming impression and impressive result. We also have today dear Ms. Aleksandra Izdebska, who has made an impressive career in Austrian and international business and continues to help business development within the framework of Austrian Business Agency. By the way, if I'm not mistaken, Aleksandra has her birthday today. And we are very grateful that she is with us, on this day, and we congratulate her from the bottom of our hearts, and we hope that later she will say that spending her birthday at the Diplomatic Academy was her beste Fälle. And last but not least, of course, Mr. Christian Wigand, who represents the European Commission in Austria, knows the workings of the Brussels political and diplomatic kitchen inside and out, and will probably share with us the recipes for its new political and political dishes and priorities, especially in the face of a sharp increase in the cost of ingredients, meaning the price of European political decisions, of course. So, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to our distinguished speakers, starting with Ambassador Brix. Dear Ambassador Brix, how would you assess the situation today? Is the diplomacy in crisis, and what tasks do you see in front of it now?
Thank you very much for the invitation to my own home here. There is no doubt that diplomacy is in crisis. No doubt. Because if there is a good reason for diplomacy, and I fully agree with what the president of the conference, but also the minister said, that diplomacy is much more than what diplomats do traditionally. But if the task of diplomacy is to avoid force, to avoid hard power decisions on how we are allowed to live and what sort of relations we are allowed to have, then diplomacy is not working. What we experience in various parts of the world is certainly not a success of diplomacy. Some people say, yes, but that's normal. You cannot expect that diplomats can save the world. This is a political issue where the power relations have to be resolved. Armies have to fight against it until there is an equal share of power, and then diplomats can make the rest. I don't agree. I would say diplomacy has to learn to adapt to the present-day situation of how our communication works, how our technology is, how we relate between states, how do we include the new actors into diplomacy. So there's a long way to go. I would say we are offering here at the Diplomatic Academy master programs of 2 years. I would double the length to 4 years. Don't worry. But you should double them because there is so much that is needed in this educational part of it. And this includes the military aspects of things, that includes the technological aspects of things, that includes the economic aspects of the world order. So yes, diplomacy is for me really in crisis.
Thank you, Ambassador Brix. I would now turn to Ambassador Petritsch. What would you say are the two major disruptions diplomacy is facing today? And must it adapt or rather transform entirely in the face of these radical changes?
Well, let's take the crisis that obviously exists and is much broader than just the crisis of diplomacy, but let's take the opportunity part of the crisis and address those issues, and this is the question that you have been asking me. What are the greatest challenges? The greatest challenge, of course, is a return to power politics. The post-1945 system, the United Nations system, then the international financial institution, Bretton Woods and so on, they have run their course, obviously. Yeah. So there are different possibilities how to deal with this. Usually, diplomacy is about continuity. Yeah. Now we are in the age of unpredictability. That's particularly coming from Washington. But this is more, there's more to it. Yeah? And the combination of big power politics and this unpredictability, which is always a sign of that something is changing on a grand scale, that is really now compounded by the fact that we live in the digital age. I think that's something where it was already made reference by Julia to what diplomacy is. It's a tool. It's not the protocol. It's not this being somewhere. You, as a diplomat, as an ambassador, you are not already the message. You have to be much more substantive than this was in the past. I also believe that the multilateralization of diplomacy has done means a huge progress, in fact. It's not only and any longer the classical situation of bilateral meetings. Already quite early on, when you think back to the post-Third World War situation, already there, multilateral issues, and then the multilateralism came up, and then of course the Vienna Congress was one of the highlights in this. And then closer to our time, it was of course the CSCE process. Yeah. Now, when we look at the global situation, nothing similar is underway, nothing at all. On the contrary, we are now in a downward spiral when it comes to diplomatic encounters, using diplomacy as a tool. Now, weaponry is much more important. And when I just saw speaking the foreign minister and reading about the new budget, the only ministry which gets more money is the Ministry of Defense. Now, I would not want to argue against it, but I would argue in favor of the other tool, and this is diplomacy, and this is the foreign ministry, to really invest in the foreign ministry. Yeah? That is something where you can see how this kind of change, almost a sea change that is happening in a country like Austria, where we were notoriously weak when it came to defense. And that's good to be corrected. But it cannot go on account of those tools which we handle the best in Austria. And in extension, in the European Union. The European Union was founded as a peace project. And it is clear, and there we need to be realistic, and we need to support and embrace the idea that we need to defend this peace project, and there the hardware obviously comes in. So here you can see that in spite of the fact that diplomacy is in a crisis, let's take the opportunity. Let's also take the narrative back that peace is actually what we want, that persuasion, that compromise, these core elements of diplomacy, they need to come to the fore. Because in the end, and my friend has already referred to it, in the end, well, once the wars are fought, we diplomats are going to be back. They're going to ask for us. Right now, there is obviously not the time for it, but let's not just say, okay, this is a crisis and therefore we cannot act. We can act, and we can also, particularly when it comes to the public, when it comes to our dealings in policy matters, in matters of how to approach a better world, I believe we are central to this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Ambassador Petritsch. Definitely important points raised for our further discussion. I would now turn to our dear Rebecca. How would you assess the current state of multilateral disarmament efforts now? Does the dialogue still play a role in restoring trust and stability today?
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here and certainly echo many of the points that have already been made. So absolutely a point of crisis for multilateral disarmament as well, and for multilateralism. And so I do think, we're at a point of introspection, and one that really necessitates us also looking back on lessons of the past. And I think Ambassador Petritsch just alluded to as well, especially if you look at multilateral disarmament or disarmament efforts and arms control efforts writ large, it's always been a complex web. It's been bilateral, it's been regional, it's been multilateral. And the system that has been put in place that has really kept us, the international community, in relative peace for a long time is under strain. I mean, if you look back, diplomacy has always been at the core of those efforts, at the core of the efforts to create the laws of armed conflicts, to establish new norms, in particular with regard to protecting humanity from weapons that have, that are deemed to be abhorrent to humanity. humanitarian principles. And so diplomacy in all its facets has been absolutely essential to that historically. And so we are at a time of crisis. What I would argue is that that time of crisis is also, I mean, it's not a sudden development, and I resist a little bit the narrative that some were suddenly in the state. It has been, especially if you look at disarmament, arms control, a long period of gradual erosion. You look at the different instruments, they've been under strain for many decades now, long predating current conflicts, including the conflict in Ukraine. You've had a conference on disarmament, which is the main negotiating forum for multilateral disarmament that has been stalled for decades. You have several review processes, review cycles of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty that have gone without an agreed outcome. We're having negotiations in New York right now that are tense. And you've had this polarization that I think has also been alluded to, and especially this great power competition, including among nuclear weapon states, that really has been ongoing and building for some time. So I think, the painstakingly negotiated tools are under threat, and as has been said by other speakers, it's a question of really bolstering and upholding and defending those. And diplomacy and dialogue have always been key to that. Confidence building, trust are the core to that, and you cannot do it. And so if we look at the trends towards rearmament, it's been mentioned, I mean, many of you, I'm sure, have seen the CIPRI data that was issued on global military spending just very recently. We're at $2.7 trillion globally. Europe and Middle East are leading the charge in terms of the greatest increase in that spending. And as Ambassador Petritsch was also saying, the question there is also, what does that come at an expense? For example, you see a parallel decrease in international development aid spending, and that's at a time where the SDGs are already under threat in terms of the progress towards achieving them. So this zero-sum game is a challenge, I think, for the international community. And of course, when it comes to nuclear risk, I think we're at one of the most precarious moments in history since the Cold War. You have nuclear weapons regaining a prominent role in national security doctrines. You have nuclear rhetoric being used liberally in conjunction with different ongoing crises. But what I would also emphasize, and it's been alluded to but not explicitly, is the erosion of humanitarian principles and humanitarian arms control and disarmament instruments, from landmines to cluster munitions. And there too, this perception of a double standard is one that I think is really one that is also causing strain and is a new challenge for diplomacy writ large. Emerging technologies, everybody's mentioned it, another area that we see that is obviously altering conflicts, altering our daily lives in so many ways, in many ways positive, but also with risk associated with them. And diplomacy and the pace of diplomacy is not able to keep pace with the speed of that and to put in the guardrails that we need to manage those risks. But I would come back to the history lessons, and we're here in a place of learning and academic rigor. Because what I think the danger is, and what you hear a lot in the current rhetoric around rearmament, is now is not the time to talk about disarmament. Now is not the time to think about diplomacy. Well, history teaches us precisely the opposite, I would argue. It is precisely in times of crisis and times of tension that these tools have become essential and important. I mean, I always give the example of the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, negotiated, agreed a year after the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so this is a challenge. And so I would say, we're in Vienna. There's a rich history here of confidence building, of dialogue and trust, and creating instruments that are essentially for safeguarding that. And we will, again, hopefully in some time, be in the time of peace. And so you have to have those tools in place that will prepare you and assure and uphold that. And so diplomacy for me is the only vehicle to achieve that. And I think you've seen member states come together. We had Pact of the Future agreed last year. This is a call for action. It's a declaration of hope. I'll stop because I know we're short on time, but I want to say one word about education. You kind of mentioned it. Education is essential to me. Diplomacy, obviously important, dialogue, but education is also where we prepare for the future. And we it's a major focus of our office here in Vienna, is equipping future leaders. I mean, people like those in the room, to work towards the advancement of these objectives. And I think this is really where the investment in the broad toolbox that many speakers have alluded to is really, really essential. And institutions like these and dialogues like these are key to that. So I would say, you know, difficult times, but history shows us that it's precisely in those times that we need that full range of tools at our disposal. So I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Also, very important statements, and something to think about, and maybe leave for a small discussion afterwards. Aleksandra, if you allow me, I would now turn and give the floor to Christian, because Christian would have to leave us soon for the European Parliament. And, dear Christian Wigand, when it comes to the European Union, how do you see its evolving role today, especially in the face of today's geopolitical challenges? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Veronika. Thank you, everyone, for having me. Excellencies, dear students, guests.
Mike.
I'm sorry, Mike. Does it work now? Yes, now you can hear me. Okay. So good to be here. Good to be back, I may say, as I'm also an alumni of this institution. Like 2 or 3 years ago, I studied here. I still remember also the conference that we organized back then. So definitely a very good and practical experience that you have here when you do this. Yeah, to come back to your question, I mean, it was already alluded to. We kind of, I mean, I think it's not only diplomacy in crisis, it's basically the post-war world order that is in crisis, or at least in a very decisive moment. We see, you know, again, a war in Europe. We see attempts to change borders by force again, something that we have thought we had kind of, you know, ruled out and changed for the better. We are also economically in an era of harsh geostrategic competition. We see it now very visibly, but it's not entirely new. It's been happening for a couple of years, maybe 10 years even, that this has been, you know, shaping up between the US and China in particular, and Europe, of course, in between. We see also our kind of traditional anchor of stability, the transatlantic alliance, in a way in crisis mode. Of course, we work hard on it to find good solutions with our American partners, but it's a complicated time. These days, you know, when you're in the diplomatic world in Vienna these days, basically you have like 1 or 2 events every day commemorating one of these anniversaries. We have 80 years of the end of the World War, so I'd like to quote President von der Leyen a few years ago on one of these occasions when she spoke in the European Parliament. She said, and I quote, 80 years on, so after the war, we stand at another decisive moment in the history of our continent. The war in Ukraine will eventually come to a halt, and the way the war ends will shape our continent for generations to come, unquote. So it's a decisive moment especially for Europe. And it's Europe Day today. Today we have the 75th anniversary of the Schuman Declaration, which was kind of the initial spark of what is today the European Union. And it was mentioned that by Ambassador Petritsch, the European Union started as a peace project. This is our basic DNA. We transformed the war-torn continent into a community of law. And of course, the core of this is diplomacy. We replaced the power, the right of might with the rule of law, with long, often cumbersome negotiations, but we managed to achieve peace and prosperity for a long, long time. And I was reminded of that in a very found nice way yesterday at one of these events in St. Pölten of the governor of Lower Austria on the end of the war, where I bumped into EU local councillor. We have this, these local councillors that we work with in different Gemeinderäte, whatever, in Austria, who work on EU affairs. And it was someone who had a background from the Arab world, but is in Austria here. And he told me, for me, I like to engage as an EU local councillor, because where I originally come from, in the Arab world, not even two countries next to each other, although they have the same religion, the same culture, manage to work peacefully with each other. They always fight. And here in Europe, you're so different. You have all these different, cultures, etc., and somehow you made it work. So that's all very good, but now we're in this difficult situation, and so what do we have to do now at the European level? I would sum it up maybe in one sentence. I think Europe has to grow up. We have relied too long on, especially on security on the United States, and well, you know it all. You know, the economic model, also relying heavily on cheap Russian gas, etc. So we have two key priorities from the European Commission at the moment for this situation. And this is, of course, on the one hand, to strengthen our competitiveness, and on the other hand, to ensure security. You've all seen probably the proposal on Readiness 2030. So yes, we talk about armament. It's important, but it's a way of growing up, of doing the homework that we haven't done for a very long time, and investing the money that is needed in our self-defense. So it's not. I think it's also important. It's a bit how do we talk about it? I don't like to call it armament. It's about self-defense, in essence, that we're talking about. So to come back to your question, is diplomacy in crisis? Yeah, probably yes. But on the other hand, I think we need diplomacy more than ever. This is something that I hear a lot now in diplomatic circles here when you talk to their ambassadors. And I think it's not only because they want to keep their job, but it's really because you need diplomacy more than ever in all of these crises. Just look at what we've done yesterday from the Commission with our proposal to the United States on our proposal. We were showing what we would do if we do not get a deal on the tariffs. And this is also a carefully crafted piece of diplomacy, if you want. And in all of these areas, we will need diplomacy in the coming years very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Christian. And finally, Aleksandra, as someone coming from the world of economics and entrepreneurship, how do you see diplomacy today? Is it still delivering results? In this fast-paced, changing global environment?
Absolutely. In my opinion, diplomacy you need everywhere, not only in a political background, also in entrepreneurship. Also, if you go to any company, it doesn't matter what would you like to produce to sell, you need diplomacy. But the point is, in my opinion, the diplomacy is right now everywhere in the crisis. This is the main point, and we have to face it, and we have to do something against it. Diplomacy was built for a peace in the world. Yeah, it was built for making best relationships, international relationships, and for global challenges. But right now we have a lot of troubles, a lot of challenges which we have to face. First of all, multilateral system was built after the Second World War to foster global cooperation, and right now it's under severe strain. The organization like United Nations, like World Trade Organizations couldn't achieve the goals which we had to achieve, and that was the big problem, of course, also with diplomacy. The next point is diplomatic failures. If we look on a Syrian civil war, if we look to Palestinian and Israel's conflicts, unfortunately, it couldn't be solved. So the diplomatic fails in this case, and we couldn't do nothing, even though we know it's a very, very tragic for the people, for the civil people. The point is also, in my opinion, is the complexity and fake news which are spread through the social media. In any different channels, people don't know what they should believe. People don't know what is the truth. And they try to find against the truth, maybe, and against the good things in the world, and I think it's make diplomacy very complicated. And the next point is also we have in the diplomacy new actors. Diplomacy was, when I look at you, young people, diplomats who were going outside trying to solve the problems. Right now, the diplomacy is in the hand of chancellors, presidents, people who are on the head of the countries. When we look on Ukraine, when we look to countries like USA and Russia, they are making diplomacy right now. It's not almost maybe the best way, but this is the truth right now. So we have to face another reality right now with the diplomacy, and I think this is a really big challenge for us and for everybody. But I'm positive, and I believe that diplomacy will grow up, and if we change the mindset a little bit, and if we change the institutions as well, and maybe find a new ways for the diplomacy, we will have a big solution for all these problems, all these troubles we have.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much, Aleksandra. Thank you for these thoughtful remarks, which actually makes me think of Josephus Daniels. He was the American diplomat and politician of the first half of the last century, who said, an army is a people gathered for one purpose: to correct the mistakes of the diplomats. Although, of course, we all know that sometimes the only mistake of the diplomat can be even a dance. But my question, maybe just for a short discussion to all of you now, is: do you think that now, in our troubled times, when the focus is very much on the demonstration of force, maybe it is worth more often to include the voice of the military now? Let's say, for example, military diplomats or generals in international diplomatic practice, in support, of course, of the civilian diplomatic efforts. Because after all, like one famous American master of the deals from the beginning of the last century, he was also saying that you can achieve much more with a kind word and a gun, but yeah, rather than with a kind word alone. So,
if I may, yes, include the military voices into the decision making, but don't leave it only to them, because we have too many experience in history what military decisions might lead to. And decisions of military personnel, the perspectives of the diplomat and the perspective of those who look for people should not be taken out of the equation. So that's very important. But let me just say that because Ambassador Petritsch was criticizing the Austrian government how we do the budget spending in the coming years, that more is spent on the military, the foreign ministry loses out as all the rest. Actually, I would say this is a very good step that finally Austria realizes that for our diplomatic efforts to be taken seriously on the international scene, we need also to invest in our defense. But I understood you in the way that you said, yes, military needs more money and foreign ministry needs more money. And there I fully agree. And in the foreign ministry, I have two proposals. One of them is it should have actually a department for cooperation with military diplomacy. It doesn't exist. There is nothing like that in the foreign ministry. And secondly, Austria should have a real national security advisor for all these issues, how to bring together the various parts of diplomatic efforts. We have something that is called National Security Advisor's Office in the Bundeskanzleramt, but this is a civil servant with who nobody knows. I'm sure nobody in this room knows the name of our of our National Security Advisor. There is one. So there should be a real strong office where you can do this. So these would be my practical proposals.
Thank you. Dr. Petritsch?
Well, my impression is, and thank you, Emil, of course, that's exactly the point. There needs to be a relationship between different tools that a government has at its disposal. Yeah, and obviously we're now more focusing on hard power than we do on diplomacy. But I believe that it is necessary, particularly, it was said before, particularly in these times, we really need to try to regain and recapture the priority of a peaceful deliberations about conflicts. Yeah? This kind of war logic that we can see from the outset in Mr. Putin's policy, yeah? And we go into this trap and we try to kind of follow his logic instead of trying to bring him out of this, of his logic, of his militaristic logic. Of course, it might sound quite naive when I'm saying this at a time when the war against Ukraine has been raging now for more than 3 years already. Yeah, but in the end, this will be the necessity, and I think it is a good example how diplomacy does not work when we look at the American approach, a la Trump. Yeah, to say we are going to resolve this in 24 hours. Yeah? We're already telling one side, you will get this, and the other side will have to agree. Mm-hmm. This is the worst possible diplomacy one can imagine. And it needs to be seen, and it needs to be addressed. And it should not end up in a polemic against the United States, but it should give us a lesson how important it is to keep the primacy in the European Union, in Austria as an important member of the European Union, the primacy of negotiations, of a peaceful conflict, so to speak, a conflict management and resolution of a conflict. This is very important. And let me make one additional point. Maybe you have already got used to it, that social media now dominate politics. It is not in the past, traditionally, the experts, diplomats, others, public servants, prepared a statement. And then it went up through the ranks and ended up at the political level. And there it was then announced. Now the situation has changed. Trump started with it. All of a sudden, it is exactly the other way around. The president sends out a message, and the whole diplomatic apparatus has to work now in order to justify and explain what the president meant. Yeah? So this is really the biggest challenge that we have. How do we as diplomats get a grip on the social media? And it's not going to work by saying, no, you must not do this. We need to learn, I think this is something, we need to learn to deal with the social media. That is something which I have no solution, I have no answer to it, but I believe it is indeed extremely important. This is actually what I wanted to say as a task also for the Diplomatic Academy and for the young generation of future diplomats. Do go into it. You are the digital natives, but find out how we can turn the social media into a useful tool for in the service of peace.
Wow.
Great task, huh?
Rebecca?
Look, I couldn't agree more with what's been said about the primacy of dialogue and nonviolent means for achieving peace. I think that's kind of the fundamental. But I would say it's also important to recall diplomacy is ultimately about trust and confidence. And the military has always also played a very important role in that regard. And I think, again, I come back to this issue of learning the lessons of the past. And I think Europe has a lot of lessons and experience to offer in this regard. And you have had a rich history of creating structures and mechanisms for confidence building and for greater transparency and trust. And that includes military to military, inspections and data sharing and so forth. So, as we've been discussing, I think you have to come back to those structures, not to say these structures are no longer relevant. We have to set them aside because we're at times of crisis. We need to really look at them and the lessons they've taught us and utilize them to prepare for the future, right? I would also say, diversity in the broader sense of the word is very, very important also when it comes to negotiating and addressing the challenges of the future. We're just talking about technology, social media, all of these things. You can't just rely on kind of bureaucrats of a certain generation to really understand and grapple with these complexities. And I really would emphasize that including in the kind of disarmament, arms control, multilateral sphere, you need a much stronger involvement of the private sector, you need civil society, you need young people, the digital natives and others who can help unpack these complexities and help add expertise and understanding and help arrive at better solutions, more sustainable solutions. So yes, the process and who's at the table and who's part of these conversations has to shift. So I think that's really, really quite fundamental if we want to look to tools that are fit for purpose and that will stand the test of time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Aleksandra?
Yes, for that we are at the end of our discussion. I will make it very, very short. I agree totally with the other guests on a podium, and I don't want to repeat it again. I would just say one sentence. The key is the balance. Military input should inform and support civilian diplomacy and not replace this. Yeah, they should work together, and in my opinion, this is the best solution and the best way maybe to go forward in the future.
Mm-hmm. Couldn't agree more. So many thanks to our speakers for the sincerity and for high intellectual standards. I mean, we as students have definitely someone to look up to. Summing up, we can state that the crises are inevitable. They have happened. They are happening, and unfortunately, they will be happening. But the greatest danger in times of instability, as one outstanding Austrian, Peter Drucker, once said. It's not the instability itself, but the actions based on yesterday's logic. So, and diplomacy, of course, it must evolve, it must grow wiser, it must seek more effective adaptation to changing international realities. But up until today, I think no more rational path has ever been found to peacefully resolve its geopolitical problems. And for all its imperfections, all its limitations and complexities, diplomacy stands as humanity's most enduring act of hope. Because what do we have as an alternative? The alternative is silence after the ticking stops, and surely we are not ready to give up on a dialogue when the world still listens to the sound of peace. So with that, I'd like to again thank you, our, of course, dear speakers and dear guests for joining us this morning. And I would like now to invite you to enjoy a cup of coffee next door, and I wish everyone a wonderful conference. Thank you.